Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you are in the world. This is Gloria White, and I am continuing with the measurements and descriptions as given in the book of Ezekiel to Ezekiel from God our Father in heaven. And here he's referred to as the Eternal One. So I'm in chapter 45. Eternal One. When you divide the land among the people to determine inheritance, you must set aside a plot of land for the Eternal as his sacred ground. It is to be 8 1/3 miles long and 6 2/3 miles wide. Every bit of it will be regarded as holy. Within this sacred ground, designate a 875-foot square for the temple. Leave a strip of land 87.5 feet wide around the perimeter of the temple. And from these sacred grounds, allot a section of land 8 1/3 miles long by 3 1/3 miles wide to place the sanctuary, which will contain the most holy place. These sacred lands will be set apart for the priests who serve in the sanctuary and draw near to the Eternal. They will build their homes there, not far from the holy precincts of the sanctuary. As for the other half of the sacred ground, an area 8 1/3 miles long and 3 1/3 miles wide, it will be designated for the Levites who serve in the temple. They will live there and possess those cities. Next to the sacred land, you are to set aside a strip of land 8 1/3 miles long and 1 2/3 miles wide to build a city. This will be a common land that belongs to all the people of Israel. The prince is to have possession of the land on either side of the sacred grounds and the common property of the city. His land will run westward from the west side and eastward from the east side, occupying an area equal to one of the tribal inheritances. This will be the prince's own section of land in Israel. Never again will my prince rob and oppress my people. Then they are to divide the rest of the land between the tribes of Israel. Ezekiel's vision of the land of Israel, once the Jews return from exile, has several significant features. Each tribe receives a similar allotment of land. The rulers are given property of their own, so the tribes don't have to support them. The temple is situated in the exact center of the country, and the priests and Levites all live around the temple itself, instead of being scattered among the tribes. These changes in the nation's political and social structure reflect many of the changes that will take place during the exile. The Eternal One. To the princes of Israel. That's enough tyranny. You princes of Israel, stop your abuse and persecutions. Do the right thing. Choose to be just in your actions. Stop cheating and depriving my people of their land. I, the eternal Lord, insist. I command you to be honest in your commerce. You are to use accurate and fair weights and measures. Regarding measures, the standard dry measure and liquid measure are to have a similar volume, about 6 bushels or 55 gallons, making the standard dry unit of measure 3. Oh man, hold on a second, folks. Got to get my magnifying glass. 3/5 of a bushel, and the standard Liquid unit of measure, 5.5 gallons. Regarding weights, one small counterweight will weigh 2/5 of an ounce, and one large counterweight will weigh 1.25 pounds. You are to offer the following: 1/60th of your wheat, 1/60th of your barley, 1% of your oil, and 1 sheep from every flock of 200 that wanders the rich watering places of Israel. I, the eternal Lord, declare that these gifts will act as the grain offerings, burnt offerings, and peace offerings that will cover the wrongs of the people and will be offered on your behalf by the priest. Everyone in Israel will be required to give these offerings to the prince in Israel. Then it will be the prince's responsibility to provide the burnt offerings, grain offerings, and drink offerings at all the sacrificed festivals, the new moon festivals, the Sabbaths, and all the rest of the feasts appointed for Israel. Using the animals and produce he's collected, the prince will provide the sin offerings, grain offerings, burnt offerings, and peace offerings to cover the wrongs done by the people of Israel. To Ezekiel. On the first day of the month, take a perfect young bull and purify the sanctuary. The priest will smear some blood of the sin offering on the temple doorpost, on the 4 corners of the ledge of the altar, and on the gatepost of the entrance to the inner courtyard. On the 7th day of the month, do this same ritual for anyone who strays from me unknowingly. Cover the impurities of the temple this way. On the 14th day of the first month, I want you to observe the Passover for 7 days. During the feast, I want you to eat only yeast-free bread. When that day arrives, it is the prince's responsibility to provide a bull for himself and for all the people of the land as a sin offering. Every day for the 7 days of the feast, the prince is to bring 7 perfect bulls and 7 perfect rams as a burnt offering to the Eternal. Also, he will present a male goat each day as a sin offering. The prince is also to provide a grain offering. 1/5 of a bushel of grain mixed with 1 gallon of oil for each bull and each ram. The 7-day feast begins on the 15th day of the 7th month. On each of the 7 days, the prince is responsible for providing the same sin offerings, burnt offerings, and grain offerings made from grain and oil. Chapter 46. This is what the Eternal Lord has to say. The Eternal One. During the 6 working days of each week, I want you to close the east gate of the inner courtyard, but keep it open on the 7th day, the Sabbath, and on the new moon. The prince is to enter from the outside through the portico of the gateway and stand directly outside the gate, where he can watch the priest offer his burnt offerings and peace offerings. He is to worship as his offerings are being made. Whoops, sorry folks, I'm off center there. And then exit the same way he entered. The priest won't shut the gate until evening. On Sabbaths and new moons, the rest of the people are to worship the Eternal at the entrance to that gate. I want the prince to give his burnt offerings to me, the Eternal, on the Sabbath. 6 lambs and a ram, all perfect. I want him to give a grain offering along with it, as is customary. 1/5 of a bushel of a grain, and a gallon of oil with the ram, and as much grain and oil as he is able for each lamb. During each new moon celebration, I want the priest to offer a young bull, 6 lambs, and a ram, all perfect. He is to provide a customary grain offering as well, 3/5 of a bushel of grain and 1 gallon of oil for each ram and bull, and as much grain and oil as he can for each lamb. The prince is to enter the temple through the portico of the eastern gate and exit the same way. When the people of the land come together to worship the Eternal at the regularly scheduled feast, all those who come in through the north gate are to go out through the south gate, and all those who come in through the south gates are to go out through the north gate. They will exit the temple through the opposite gate, so they continue to move straight ahead. During these feasts, the prince will walk with everyone else, entering and exiting at the same time and in the same way as the commoners. At all the feasts and regular scheduled feasts, the customary grain offering is to always be the same, 3/5 of a bushel of grain plus 1 gallon of oil for each bull and each ram, and as much grain and oil as is available for each lamb. Whenever the priest gives a voluntary offering to the Eternal, be it a burnt offering or a peace offering, he will have the same privileges as he does for all Sabbath offerings. The east gate will be opened for him. He will offer his burnt offering and peace offering as he does on the Sabbath, and after he leaves, the priests are to close the east gate. Every single morning, I want the priest to offer a perfect 1-year-old lamb to me as a burnt offering. Along with it, each morning you are to offer a grain offering, 1/10 of a bushel of grain, mixed with 1/3 gallon of oil, in order to moisten the flour. This grain offering is to be an ordinance you observe for all time. The lamb, the grain, and the oil are to be offered every single morning as a regular burnt offering. This is what the Eternal Lord has to say. Eternal One, if the prince gives one of his sons a piece of property as his inheritance, the property I allotted to him on either side of my land, that piece will belong to all the descendants of that son and never leave the family. But if the prince gives a piece of property to one of his servants, it will be leased by the servant only until the 50th year, the Jubilee year, when liberty is granted. Then the inheritance will return to the prince. The prince's inheritance belongs to his sons alone. It is never to leave the family. Summarily, the prince must never demand possession of other people's property and evict them from their own land. He is to give his sons their inheritance from his own property. This way, none of my people will be separated from his property. The man whose appearance was like bronze then took me through the entrance next to the gateway and led me to the priest's sacred chambers, which faced northward. He took me to a place on the far western side. The man to Ezekiel. This is where the priests are to boil the meat of the guilt offering and sin offering, and bake the bread made from the grain offerings, so that they won't have to transport the gifts through the outer courtyard and accidentally transmit holiness to the people. Then my guide brought me to the outer courtyard and took me to each of its 4 corners. In each corner were smaller, confined courts, each measuring 70 feet and 52.5 feet wide. There was a stone shelf that ran along the inside wall of each of the 4 courts. Beneath these stone shelves were hearths. The man to Ezekiel. These are kitchens. Everyone who serves in the temple will boil the people's sacrifices here. And I'm going to stop this one, and I will pick up at chapter 47 in the next one. I love you.